They mocked the 18-year-old at his first AA gun until he saved 2 battalions. You're about to hear a story the history books barely mention. A story where an 18-year-old rookie, mocked by his entire unit on his first day behind an AA gun, ended up stopping an airstrike that should have wiped out 2 full battalions. No glory, no experience. Just one impossible decision made under fire, and a shot so insane that veteran gunners still argue about how he pulled it off. Before we jump into the moment that changed everything, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of these unbelievable battlefield stories. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what you're doing right now while this video is playing. Alright, let's step onto that frozen ridge and watch the instant a kid they laughed at became the only reason hundreds of soldiers made it home alive. December 14th, 1944. Cold mist clung to the hillside as an 18-year-old private gripped the traverse handles of a 37mm anti-aircraft gun. His helmet sat slightly crooked, breath turning to fog as he stared upward, searching the gray sky for the shapes everyone feared. Around him, soldiers crouched behind sandbags, boots sunk into frozen mud, waiting for an attack they all knew was coming. It was his first real combat assignment, and every man in the platoon knew it. They had spent the morning teasing him. Rookie. Kids never even fired at a moving target. Don't let him jam the gun again. They laughed, because laughing was easier than admitting the truth. This thin, nervous teenager now stood behind the only weapon capable of protecting 2 entire battalions pinned in the valley below. The manual said the gun was simple: track, lead, fire, but nothing felt simple now. The traverse wheel shook violently every time the barrel shifted. The elevation gears were worn from months of non-stop action in the Ardennes. The gun's movement lagged behind his hands, forcing him to fight the weapon as much as the enemy. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Training ranges were flat, predictable, clean. War wasn't. A distant rumble rolled through the low clouds. Not thunder engines, multiple, growing louder. Someone shouted, "Eyes up! Aircraft incoming!" The platoon commander moved behind him, voice tight but controlled. "Hold steady. Wait for visual. Don't fire blind." But the rookie could already feel his stomach tightening. He knew the terrain, knew the angle. The planes wouldn't appear gently. They would burst from the clouds in a steep dive, and if he waited for perfect alignment the way the manual demanded, they would already be past him too fast, too close, too deadly. He tightened his grip. The cold bit into his fingers. A sergeant barked, "Kid, do not overlead. Follow the book, 2000. But the book wasn't written for this hillside. It wasn't written for this gun, this weather, this moment. A shadow flickered in the mist. Then another. Engines roared as enemy aircraft broke through the clouds, diving straight toward the trapped infantry units below. The rookie inhaled once, deeply. He pulled the barrel ahead of the target far more than regulation allowed, and felt every head around him snap in confusion. This was the moment they mocked him for. This was the moment he would prove them wrong. The fog hanging over the ridge thickened as the engines grew louder, and the young gunner felt the hillside tremble slightly beneath the weight of hundreds of soldiers bracing for an attack they feared might shatter their already thin defensive line. Behind the anti-aircraft position, long columns of infantry huddled in shallow trenches carved into frozen soil, waiting for orders that would decide whether they would stand and fight or attempt a desperate withdrawal through the narrow valley behind them. The officers overseeing the defense understood that the approaching aircraft represented far more than a routine harassment strike, because intelligence reports earlier that morning warned of a coordinated enemy maneuver intended to collapse the entire sector. While the rookie clung to the cold metal grips of the AA gun, he sensed the tension bleeding through the ranks around him, as seasoned sergeants murmured to one another about dwindling ammunition reserves, broken communication lines, and the unnerving possibility that their support artillery might not be able to respond in time. The distant thunder of engines rolled unevenly across the snow-dampened terrain, masking the nervous breaths of the men crouched behind sandbags, and giving the impression that the sky itself was tightening like a clenched fist prepared to strike. The platoon commander moved methodically from crew to crew, issuing clipped reminders about fields of fire and fallback boundaries, though his eyes betrayed a quiet fear that the defenses were stretched far too thin for the scale of the assault they expected. Every man present knew that 2 battalions had been pushed into the basin below, and that their survival depended entirely on whether the hilltop AA guns could break the initial attack long enough for the infantry to reorganize behind a secondary line. The young gunner realized he held a responsibility far larger than anything he had been trained for, because failure here would not simply mean losing a gun position, but allowing enemy aircraft to shred the trapped units before they had any chance to escape the tightening noose. The cold wind carried the metallic scent of oiled machinery from the gun mount, blending with the raw smell of wet earth and hinting at the violence about to unfold as the first aircraft silhouettes pierced the thinning cloud layer. The rookie kept his eyes locked on the faint shapes forming above the tree line, noticing how the enemy approached in a shallow formation designed to overwhelm the defenders by striking from multiple angles at once, a tactic that had already broken several American positions earlier in the campaign. The gunner's heartbeat pounded in uneasy rhythm with the rattling traverse gears, which groaned under the strain of sudden movement as he adjusted the barrel in anticipation of the steep attack dive he knew was coming. He felt the weight of inexperience pressing heavily on his shoulders, yet he also sensed a strange clarity rising within him, as though the battlefield noise had begun to strip away everything except the simple truth that hesitation would doom everyone below. Soldiers along the ridge tightened their grips on rifles they knew would be nearly useless against armored aircraft, and several glanced toward the AA gun with a mixture of hope and doubt, silently wondering whether the trembling teenager behind the controls would hold steady when the heavens erupted. The platoon commander crouched beside the gun pit and shouted over the rising roar that the enemy was closing fast, urging the rookie to wait for his mark and reminding him not to waste precious ammunition on rushed shots. Yet even as the officer spoke, the gunner observed the formation shifting into a sharper angle, indicating an earlier dive than doctrine predicted, and he understood that timing alone would decide whether 2 battalions lived or died in the next few minutes. When the first enemy aircraft finally tore through the cloud deck, sunlight flashed briefly off their wings like sparks from a grinding wheel, and the hillside erupted with alarmed shouts that merged into a single rising wave of fear as the attack began its deadly descent toward the valley. The sudden appearance of the first diving aircraft shattered the fragile silence that had held the ridge together, unleashing a chaotic surge of overlapping commands, frantic movements, and raw fear that crackled through the gun crews like an electrical current about to overload every nerve. Soldiers who moments earlier had crouched in tense anticipation now scrambled to their positions with a desperate urgency, fumbling with ammunition crates, tightening loose straps, and shouting half-formed warnings that dissolved instantly beneath the deafening roar of engines slicing through the frozen air. The platoon commander attempted to impose order on the storm by issuing disciplined fire control instructions, yet even his voice carried a tremor of disbelief as he realized how rapidly the enemy formation was committing to the attack. The gunner beside the rookie struggled with a heavy box of 37mm shells, nearly dropping it when a second pair of aircraft emerged from the cloud deck, because the angle of their approach signaled a coordinated strike pattern meant to saturate every defensive position simultaneously. Men along the ridge instinctively ducked, despite knowing that evasive movements were futile against aircraft already locked into their attack vectors, and several shouted contradictory corrections toward the AA emplacement, revealing how fear was beginning to override the strict discipline expected under fire. The rookie felt the vibrations of the incoming engines reverberate through the gun mount, merging with the metallic clatter of misaligned gears that groaned under the strain of rapid traverse adjustments far beyond what the weapon had been designed to withstand. In the narrow trenches behind the gun pit, infantrymen pressed themselves against the damp walls as dust and loose soil rained from above, shaken free by the concussion of the aircraft screaming overhead, while others whispered hurried prayers that wavered between terror and determination. The platoon's radio man fought to maintain contact with command headquarters, but the channel filled intermittently with static and fragmented transmissions, signaling that other units along the line were also being overwhelmed by simultaneous air assaults. The commander knelt beside the rookie again, gripping the rim of the gun shield with white-knuckled tension as he shouted a reminder to hold steady and fire only when the target passed through the sight aperture, though the words nearly vanished beneath the rising howl of wind rushing around the descending aircraft. The gunner assisting the rookie cursed under his breath as he fed the first shell into the loading tray, because his gloves were stiff from cold and coated with a thin layer of frozen mud that caused the heavy casing to slip dangerously close to the edge of the pit. He yelled for someone to stabilize the ammunition crate, but the nearest soldier was already sprinting toward a secondary foxhole, where a burst of enemy machine gun fire had torn through the sandbags and scattered debris across the defensive line. The uncertainty of where the next attack would strike intensified the sense of helplessness gripping the unit, and even veteran troops found themselves glancing skyward with a mixture of dread and disbelief as the formation continued tightening into a deadly funnel shape above the valley. Through it all, the rookie remained frozen in a strange blend of terror and focus, gripping the traverse handles so tightly that the cold metal bit into his palms, yet refusing to look away from the rapidly expanding silhouettes diving through the shifting mist. He heard the crew chief shout that the gun's traverse delay was worsening under the stress, warning that misalignment could throw off every calculation and render their only defensive weapon nearly useless at the moment it was most desperately required. Still, the young gunner remained locked onto the lead aircraft, sensing instinctively that any hesitation or misplaced adjustment would send the entire hillside spiraling into chaos, far beyond recovery. As the first enemy plane cut through the final layer of fog and leveled its guns toward the trapped battalions below, the ridge erupted with shouted warnings, clattering equipment, and the rising scream of engines closing into attack range, forging a wave of pressure that crashed directly onto the shoulders of the rookie, who now held the fate of hundreds in his trembling hands. The official procedure for operating the 37mm anti-aircraft gun had been drilled into every trainee with mechanical precision, emphasizing slow, deliberate movements that prioritized safety and predictable control rather than the frantic improvisation demanded by real combat. In training, instructors insisted that the gunner maintain a perfectly steady traverse rate and avoid rapid course corrections, because sudden changes in direction created vibrations that could distort the optical sight and cause misaligned bursts that wasted valuable ammunition. The rookie remembered those lessons clearly, recalling how the manuals described the ideal firing solution as a calm, practiced sequence in which the gunner aligned the barrel with mathematical certainty and trusted the weapon to remain stable beneath his hands. Textbook doctrine required the gunner to wait for the target to cross the center of the sighting reticle, then adjust lead by a precise number of degrees determined by altitude, speed, and direction, all calculated under the assumption that the equipment responded instantly to every input. The manual stated that the 37mm gun should be traversed smoothly in a single continuous arc, with the loader feeding rounds at a controlled pace to maintain consistent recoil patterns that made follow-up shots easier to predict. These procedures had been designed during periods of controlled testing under stable weather and terrain conditions, where the gun mount sat firmly on level ground and the traverse gears moved with lubricated ease. On the ridge that morning, however, nothing resembled the sanitized predictability of the training range, and every assumption woven into the instruction book seemed increasingly detached from the violent reality screaming down from the sky. The uneven hillside caused the gun's base to shift slightly with each recoil, forcing the rookie to muscle the traverse handles harder than expected just to keep the barrel aligned with the approaching aircraft. The cold temperature thickened the lubricants in the gears, introducing a lag that the manual never accounted for, because designers had imagined the gun operating in moderate weather rather than the freezing winds cutting across the Ardennes. The loader struggled to maintain the recommended pace, his gloves stiffened by frost and mud, which made each shell feel heavier than it should and disrupted the rhythm required for coordinated firing. Even the optical sight, supposedly engineered for clarity in low-light conditions, fogged slightly every time the rookie exhaled, adding a layer of distortion that shifted the lead points by several crucial yards and made textbook timing nearly impossible. The manual's confident assurance that proper lead guarantees interception seemed laughably optimistic when the enemy aircraft plunged downward with unpredictable micro-movements caused by turbulence that transformed their approach into a chaotic dance beyond any doctrinal calculation. The gunner sensed these discrepancies instinctively, feeling how each delay in the traverse gears pushed the barrel half a heartbeat behind the target's trajectory, turning every carefully memorized procedure into a liability that endangered not only his crew, but the 2 battalions depending on him. Still, protocol demanded adherence, and the platoon commander continued shouting reminders to follow the prescribed steps, believing that discipline would triumph over chaos if the gunner remained calm and trusted his training. Yet the rookie understood in a way the manual never acknowledged that the battlefield did not reward calm repetition, because the enemy was not a predictable silhouette on a training chart, but a rapidly descending threat that exploited every weakness in the weapon's mechanical behavior. Each second that passed reinforced the widening gap between what the book described and what the gun actually did, forcing him to confront the harsh truth that the standard procedure could not save anyone in the valley if he applied it without question. The young gunner tightened his grip as another aircraft swept into view, recognizing that the moment he had feared since the beginning of his training had finally arrived, because he now faced a split-second decision that would determine whether he clung to the rigid doctrine drilled into him or trusted the instincts forming under the crushing weight of combat. The more the rookie struggled against the trembling traverse handles, the more he sensed a subtle mechanical flaw lurking beneath the gun's surface. A flaw so ingrained into the weapon's aging frame that no manual could have anticipated its impact under the brutal pressure of a real combat dive. Each time he tried to follow the prescribed sequence, the barrel lagged slightly behind his intended movement, creating a faint but measurable delay that compounded with every shift in elevation until the entire firing solution drifted dangerously off target. He realized that the gears responsible for distributing the traverse force were grinding unevenly, producing a stuttering motion that the instructors back home had dismissed as normal wear, though none of them had ever tested the weapon, while enemy aircraft plunged toward friendly lines at lethal speeds. As the first attack run drew nearer, the gunner felt the misalignment becoming increasingly pronounced, because the weapon no longer responded as a unified machine but instead behaved like several competing parts, reluctantly cooperating under stress. The hillside's uneven slope amplified this mechanical resistance, causing the base plate to dip slightly after each recoil, which in turn shifted the barrel's alignment by a margin too small for the naked eye, yet catastrophic for precision anti-aircraft fire. The manual's insistence on smooth, continuous movement suddenly felt absurdly optimistic, since the equipment itself refused to execute such movements with anything resembling the reliability promised during training. The cold further stiffened the joints and slowed the lubrication flow, transforming what should have been a predictable rotational arc into a jagged, inconsistent motion that contradicted every theoretical chart the rookie had ever studied. Even the loader's struggle fed into this growing technical dilemma, because each time he forced another shell into the feed tray with numb fingers, the gun pitched slightly under the uneven weight distribution, introducing micro-adjustments that further complicated the already delicate calculations required for an accurate intercept. The rookie realized that the machine, the hillside, the temperature, and the unfolding battle were conspiring against the rigid doctrine he had been taught, revealing an ecosystem of hidden variables that the manual had never acknowledged. That manual assumed a world where machinery behaved perfectly, weather cooperated politely, and the enemy moved according to predictable patterns, yet the battlefield below him contradicted every line of those tidy instructions. As the planes drew closer, the rookie noticed their dive angles shifting unpredictably, because the pilots were adjusting to the terrain in real time, exploiting downdrafts and crosswinds that altered their trajectories in ways no chart or handbook could reliably model. These movements compressed the timing window into something impossibly narrow, turning the idealized 3-second lead correction into a death sentence for anyone attempting to apply it mechanically. The gunner's pulse quickened as he realized the full implications of this hidden problem. The procedure depended on conditions that had not existed on the ridge even for a single moment, meaning the doctrine he had been ordered to follow was effectively obsolete the instant the enemy appeared. Despite the chaos around him, the rookie felt a strange clarity rising from this realization, because he finally understood that the danger did not come merely from the hostile aircraft, but from the blind trust placed in a rulebook written for a different world entirely. He saw that the real threat was the gap between theory and reality, a gap widened by every shudder of the gun mount and every distorted movement of the descending planes. In that moment, he knew that if he continued obeying the manual, the weapon would remain permanently behind the fight, condemning the 2 battalions below to annihilation before they even had the chance to regroup. The rookie tightened his grip once more, recognizing that the battle ahead demanded something far removed from the safe, predictable methods he had memorized, and that survival would depend on abandoning doctrine long enough to trust the instincts forming inside him under the crushing weight of necessity. The realization that the manual could not save anyone forced the rookie into an uncomfortable clarity because he now understood that survival hinged not on rehearsed formulas, but on perceiving subtle patterns hidden beneath the chaos of the incoming attack. As he watched the aircraft carve aggressive trajectories through the thinning clouds, he noticed that their dive paths curved slightly earlier than expected, suggesting a recurring shift in airflow caused by the valley's steep edges funneling cold morning winds upward. This pattern created a brief but consistent moment when the planes dipped lower than the textbook models predicted, offering a microscopic opportunity for interception that only someone closely observing the terrain could recognize. The rookie sensed this deviation instinctively because he had been staring at the same patch of sky for what felt like hours, memorizing the rhythm of every vibration pulsing through the gun mount. The subtle delay in the traverse gears, which moments earlier had seemed like an unforgivable burden, began revealing a possible advantage, because the lag forced the barrel to swing slightly behind the intended path and inadvertently match the curvature of the aircraft's adjusted dive. This unexpected alignment sparked a thought that contradicted every line of the manual, suggesting that the gun could intercept the enemy only if he exaggerated the lead angle far beyond regulation and allowed the weapon's flawed mechanics to complete the correction automatically. The idea felt reckless and dangerous, especially for a first-time gunner, yet the logic behind it grew clearer with every observation, as though the battlefield itself was whispering a solution through the wind and metal. He tightened his grip again, testing the hypothesis with a small, deliberate shift in the traverse, noticing how the barrel's delayed response produced a smoother arc when he pushed it further than necessary, making the motion appear counterintuitively more stable than when he followed standard doctrine. The rookie recognized that this overlead technique would horrify any instructor because it violated the core principle of controlled movement and risked throwing the entire firing solution into chaos if mistimed by even a fraction of a second. Yet he also understood that the enemy pilots were counting on defenders to cling to predictable procedures, since those procedures guaranteed a consistent miss when the attackers manipulated altitude and speed to exploit the weapon's mechanical limitations. Around him, the chaos intensified as the aircraft began tightening into a steeper assault formation, and the gun crew shouted conflicting instructions that blurred beneath the thunderous engines, creating a cacophony that threatened to drown out the fragile insight forming inside his mind. Despite this surrounding confusion, the rookie's attention narrowed until the world collapsed into a single intersecting point where terrain, machinery, and instinct aligned into something both primitive and strangely precise. He could sense the timing window opening and closing like a heartbeat, brief enough to terrify him yet unmistakably present each time the descending aircraft skimmed the ridge's airflow boundary. That window confirmed the accuracy of his intuition, because the gun would only strike true if he embraced a method so unorthodox that no seasoned gunner would dare attempt it under pressure. He inhaled deeply, feeling the cold burn his lungs while the gun mount trembled beneath another banking aircraft, and for the first time since the attack began, he no longer felt like an overwhelmed teenager, but rather someone seeing the battlefield through a lens, sharpened by necessity. The counterintuitive idea pulsed through him with growing confidence. He needed to pull the barrel ahead of the target far earlier than training allowed, let the lag snap the gun back into alignment, and fire at the precise instant before the correction completed. It was a method born from instinct and desperation, yet grounded in the realities of the ridge, the weapon, and the attack unfolding above him. As the rookie steadied his stance and prepared to commit to the unconventional technique, he understood that everyone around him would consider the maneuver reckless or even foolish, but he also knew that refusing to act meant accepting certain disaster for the hundreds of soldiers trapped below. In that moment, the unconventional solution ceased to feel like a gamble, and instead transformed into the only viable path forward, a fragile thread of hope forged from chaos that he alone was positioned to grasp. The moment the rookie shifted his stance and began easing the barrel into the exaggerated lead angle required for his untested idea, several nearby soldiers noticed the deviation and reacted with a mixture of alarm and frustration that cut sharply through the already chaotic battlefield. A sergeant positioned behind the ammunition crates shouted that the rookie was drifting far beyond the authorized firing arc, warning that such recklessness could jam the traverse mechanism or damage the delicate sighting alignment that had taken precious minutes to stabilize under pressure. His voice carried the authority of experience, yet beneath the surface lay a palpable fear that the young gunner's unconventional movements might trigger a catastrophic misfire at the worst possible moment. Another crewman, hunched inside the gun pit while shielding his face from the swirling dust, leaned forward and yelled that first-day recruits had no business improvising during a coordinated air assault, insisting that even seasoned gunners waited for clear orders before making adjustments that contradicted established doctrine. The comment struck with a sting of condescension sharpened by panic, because the men were terrified of losing the only defensive weapon capable of disrupting the enemy's descending formation. These doubts echoed across the pit as others joined in, their voices rising above the engine roar in an attempt to rein the rookie back into the safe, familiar confines of the manual they had been taught to trust implicitly. The platoon commander, caught between the urgency of the attack and the responsibility of maintaining discipline, stepped closer to the gunner and demanded that he return the barrel to regulation position, emphasizing that one wrong move could ruin their last chance of holding the ridge. His tone, though stern, revealed the strain of a leader unable to reconcile his training with the rapidly shifting reality overhead, because he too sensed that the standard rules might not withstand the speed and ferocity of the incoming dive. Still, he could not abandon the structure that defined his authority, so he tried to steer the rookie toward compliance by reminding him that unapproved techniques endangered not only the gun crew, but the entire battalion pinned below. The rookie heard every word and felt the weight of their collective doubt pressing against him like a physical force, threatening to crush the fragile confidence he had only begun to form moments earlier. Yet as he watched the aircraft banking into their attack sweep, he recognized the same aerodynamic pattern repeating again, the same downward slip caused by the ridge winds, the same brief pause before the final dive, the same precise moment when the standard lead calculation would fail completely. That recognition steadied him more than any encouragement could, because it proved that the battlefield, not the manual, was the true teacher guiding his decisions. A nearby soldier, desperate and exhausted, shouted that the kid would get them all killed if he kept trying to outthink seasoned instructors who knew the weapon better than any fresh recruit could. The accusation sparked a ripple of nervous laughter that barely concealed how close the men felt to breaking under pressure, and for a heartbeat the rookie wondered whether they might physically pull him away from the gun if he hesitated long enough for doubt to take root. But just as that fear crept into his mind, another aircraft descended sharply through the thinning fog, its angle confirming every instinct he had gathered since the attack began. That confirmation snapped his resolve into focus, because he now knew with absolute certainty that following the manual would guarantee failure, while trusting his unconventional idea, however reckless it seemed, offered their only real chance to disrupt the oncoming strike. Though the crew around him continued shouting warnings and insults, the noise faded into a distant hum as he centered himself behind the trembling weapon, preparing to commit the single act that everyone mocked him for even considering. With the ridge trembling beneath approaching engines and doubt swirling around him like the bitter winter wind, the rookie tightened his grip on the traverse handles and accepted that the moment to choose had finally arrived, because there was no longer space for hesitation in a battle already slipping beyond the reach of standard doctrine. The instant the rookie committed to the exaggerated lead angle, the aircraft's shadow swept across the ridge, and he fired a burst that tore through the air with a violence that startled even him, though the rounds detonated harmlessly behind the diving plane, confirming that his timing was still dangerously premature. The recoil hammered the gun mount harder than expected, causing the barrel to dip slightly as the base shifted on the uneven slope, forcing the rookie to fight for control, while dust and frozen soil rained down from the trench walls around the gun pit. Several crewmen shouted that he had wasted precious ammunition, and warned that another misaligned burst would leave them defenseless during the crucial moments of the rapidly tightening attack pattern. The traverse gears groaned in protest as the rookie attempted to correct the barrel's drift, revealing how badly the weapon's internals were struggling under the strain of forced adjustments that contradicted every principle outlined in the training manual. His loader scrambled to push another shell into position, nearly slipping in the process, and cursed as the heavy casing struck the feed tray at an awkward angle, creating a metallic clang that reverberated like a warning bell throughout the pit. For a moment, the rookie felt an overwhelming urge to abandon his unorthodox method and return to the rigid, familiar sequence he had practiced endlessly in training, because the chaos unfolding around him made every mistake feel magnified beyond repair. The aircraft pivoting into its second dive seemed to confirm the doubts shouting in his ears, as the enemy pilot adjusted his trajectory with a calculated elegance that appeared designed to punish any hesitation or miscalculation by the defenders. The rookie caught sight of the commander glaring at him with equal parts fear and frustration, silently urging him to follow standard procedure before the entire position collapsed under a flawlessly executed assault. Even the riflemen huddled behind the sandbags seemed to watch with narrowed eyes, their breaths forming faint clouds that drifted upward as if waiting to see whether the young gunner would crumble under the pressure of their expectations. Yet beneath the noise and panic, the rookie sensed something subtle in the wake of his misfire. The rounds had landed just a fraction too late, meaning the initial instinct behind his unorthodox method had been directionally accurate, but incorrectly timed. This realization flickered across his thoughts like a brief spark of hope, because it suggested that the technique might still succeed if he committed to it fully, rather than flinching in response to the crew's shouts. He watched the lead aircraft circle into its next attack angle and noticed once again the familiar downward slip beneath the ridge's wind boundary, confirming that the environmental pattern remained consistent, even if his execution had faltered momentarily. The rookie steadied his breathing despite the cold slicing through his lungs, focusing on the delicate balance between the gun's mechanical lag and the aircraft's unpredictable descent, understanding that the timing window opening before him was vanishingly small, yet undeniably present. The crew shouted for him to stop experimenting and return the barrel to regulation position, but their words washed over him like distant echoes, unable to penetrate the intense concentration crystallizing behind his narrowed gaze. The gunner felt the vibration of the second dive pulsing through the mount, merging with his sense of timing until both formed a single rhythm that guided his hands more effectively than any instruction sheet ever had. As the aircraft committed to its final approach on the ridge, the rookie tightened his grip and adjusted the barrel once more, determined to trust the counterintuitive technique that had nearly failed but not yet disproven itself, because he now understood that survival required embracing the risk fully, rather than retreating halfway into uncertainty. Though his first attempt had missed and shaken the confidence of everyone around him, the young gunner refused to surrender to fear, knowing that the next burst would determine whether his instincts were madness, or the only viable path to saving the hundreds of soldiers trapped below. The moment the aircraft dipped into its next dive, the rookie felt a sudden alignment between the gun's mechanical lag and the shifting wind currents, creating a fleeting window in which his unconventional method might actually intersect the descending threat with lethal precision. He pulled the barrel far ahead of the target once more, this time embracing the exaggerated motion without hesitation, allowing the traverse delay to swing the weapon back into perfect sync with the aircraft's curvature, rather than fighting the natural rhythm that had frustrated him moments earlier. The crew shouted warnings that blurred into indistinct noise as the young gunner slipped into a state of instinctive concentration, where every vibration in the gun mount communicated a pulse of information no manual had ever taught him to read. When the aircraft screamed past the ridgeline and entered the narrow slip of air where the downdraft bent its trajectory, the rookie sensed the lag snapping into alignment, a full heartbeat before the correction completed, prompting him to fire at the exact instant when the gun seemed least prepared, yet most synchronized with the enemy's path. The burst detonated ahead of the plane in a tight cluster, erupting into a violent bloom of metal fragments that sliced through the aircraft's leading edge with a precision so improbable that even the veteran crewmen froze in stunned disbelief. A heartbeat later, the enemy plane lurched violently, trailing smoke as its wing buckled and spiraled downward in a crashing arc that carved a dark scar across the snowy hillside below. The ridge erupted with shouts of shock and disbelief, because the men had not expected the rookie's reckless maneuver to produce anything but another near miss. Yet the sky now held the unmistakable proof of his instincts taking form in a moment that rewrote the rhythm of the battle. The gunner hardly reacted to the celebration around him, because another aircraft was already diving, and he felt the same subtle interplay of wind, lag, and timing begin to repeat itself, like a pattern waiting for him alone to notice. Without pausing, he dragged the barrel ahead of the next target, again relying on the mechanical imbalance that had once been a burden, but now acted as an unorthodox ally, guiding the weapon's arc into an optimal firing position. The second burst left the barrel with a thunderous recoil that rattled the entire emplacement, yet the pattern repeated flawlessly as the delayed correction intersected the incoming aircraft at a point where no textbook calculation would ever expect a hit. Fragmentation tore across the fuselage in a devastating line, and the plane erupted into flames mid-air before breaking apart into two burning pieces that plummeted toward the valley floor, sending waves of astonished cries through the infantrymen watching from below. The commander stared at the rookie with a mixture of disbelief and dawning recognition, realizing that the young gunner had discovered a firing rhythm born entirely from battlefield conditions rather than theoretical doctrine. By the time the third aircraft rolled into its attack approach, the rookie was already adjusting the barrel with growing confidence, tracing an anticipatory arc that treated the gun's mechanical flaws as built-in components of a new, adaptive firing system crafted from instinct and necessity. He felt no fear now, only a sharpened focus that fused the weapon, the terrain, and the enemy's maneuvers into a single cohesive equation that his mind solved intuitively with each breath. When he fired again, the burst connected so cleanly that the impact severed the plane's engine mount, sending the aircraft tumbling out of formation in a chaotic spiral that confirmed the success of his method beyond any remaining doubt. As the flaming wreckage tumbled across the valley and the remaining enemy planes struggled to readjust their attack pattern, the rookie's crew finally grasped that the quiet, trembling teenager they had mocked minutes earlier had unlocked a technique capable of reshaping the fight entirely. The hillside no longer trembled with helpless tension but surged with a renewed surge of hope because the gunner's improbable success had broken the rhythm of the enemy's assault and proven that his so-called reckless instinct was not recklessness at all, but a battlefield-born understanding the doctrine had never anticipated. The destruction of 3 enemy aircraft in rapid succession sent a shockwave of disbelief across the ridge, but the rookie barely noticed the stunned reactions because another section of the formation was already peeling into position for a coordinated strike against the trapped units below. He understood with chilling clarity that his unexpected success meant little unless he could maintain the momentum long enough to disrupt the entire attack cycle and buy the infantry precious minutes to reorganize along the secondary defensive line. The gun mount trembled beneath his boots as he shifted the barrel yet again, embracing the unstable rhythm of wind and lag that had become the backbone of his improvised technique, guiding each adjustment with a confidence grown entirely from battlefield necessity rather than instruction. Below the ridge, the 2 endangered battalions struggled to reposition amid scattered debris and half-collapsed trenches, aware that a successful enemy strike would shred their vulnerable formation before they could establish even the faintest semblance of order. Officers shouted for their men to keep low and move quickly, while medics rushed between wounded soldiers who prayed that the anti-aircraft position above them could continue holding back the deadly storm descending from the sky. Every pair of eyes that dared to look upward saw the same improbable sight. A single AA gun crew, led by a teenager who moments earlier had been dismissed as a liability, now fighting with a determination that threatened to rewrite the outcome of the battle. When the next aircraft committed to its dive, the rookie once again dragged the barrel far ahead of the target, allowing the mechanical delay to snap the aim back into alignment precisely as the plane crossed the narrow interception corridor formed by the valley's shifting wind currents. His timing, refined through instinct and repeated success, felt sharper than ever, and the resulting burst struck the aircraft squarely across its engine housing, igniting a violent fire that engulfed the entire fuselage before it plummeted into the distant tree line. The eruption of flame reflected in the rookie's eyes as scattered cheers rose from the trenches below, though the celebration lasted only a heartbeat before another pair of enemy planes streaked downward with lethal intent. Determined not to lose focus, the gunner shifted his stance and repeated the technique that had proven itself under impossible pressure, reading the aircraft's trajectory with a precision that no training manual could ever teach. His next burst detonated just ahead of the second plane's cockpit, shredding the canopy and sending fragments spiraling into the air as the pilot lost control and crashed into the open fields beyond the ridge. The third attacker attempted to break away in response, but the sudden disruption of the formation left it vulnerable, and the rookie seized the opportunity with a rapid correction that compensated for the gun's lag so perfectly that the final burst struck the fleeing aircraft's stabilizer, sending it tumbling into a smoking crater. With the immediate threat neutralized, the battlefield shifted from chaotic panic to stunned relief, as officers in the valley realized the attack wave had been broken decisively enough to halt the enemy's planned synchronized strike. The breathing space afforded by the rookie's actions allowed the 2 battered battalions to complete their withdrawal into fortified positions, where artillery support and reinforcements finally stood ready to provide meaningful protection. What minutes earlier had seemed like an inevitable slaughter, now transformed into a narrow but undeniable survival, secured not by flawless doctrine, but by the intuition of a young gunner willing to defy every rule he had been taught. As the final echoes of the retreating aircraft faded into the winter sky, the ridge fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the wind and the labored breaths of men who understood that a catastrophe had been narrowly averted. In that silence, they also understood that the rookies' impossible accuracy had not merely disrupted an attack, but had saved hundreds of lives by preventing the enemy from tearing through the valley before the defenders could regroup. The realization settled across the hillside with a weight far greater than the smoke from the wreckage, because everyone present now knew that a single gunner's instinctive defiance had preserved 2 entire battalions from annihilation. In the minutes following the shattered assault, the ridge gradually shifted from desperate chaos to a stunned quiet, as officers and enlisted men alike processed the unnerving realization that an 18-year-old gunner had single-handedly altered the trajectory of a battle that should have ended in catastrophic loss. The platoon commander, still gripping the rim of the gun shield, studied the smoking wreckage scattered across the valley and understood that the rookie's unorthodox technique had not been a fluke, but a functional adaptation that turned mechanical shortcomings into tactical advantages under extreme pressure. He summoned the nearest runner and ordered a field report drafted immediately, insisting that every detail of the rookie's maneuver be recorded before the demands of the battlefield erased the clarity of what they had witnessed. While the crew caught their breath, senior non-commissioned officers from neighboring gun emplacements arrived to inspect the weapon, their expressions oscillating between disbelief and reluctant admiration as they examined the scorched barrel and trembling traverse handles that had somehow produced a firing pattern more effective than anything described in the doctrinal manuals. They questioned the rookie repeatedly, expecting vague guesses or accidental coincidences, yet his explanation of how the wind shear, dive angle, and mechanical lag interacted revealed a battlefield intuition that impressed even the hardened veterans skeptical of improvisation. These sergeants returned to their units carrying hastily scribbled notes, determined to test the technique themselves before the next wave of enemy aircraft attempted another coordinated strike. Further down the valley, officers directing the reorganizing battalions received confirmation that the ridge defenses had held long enough for artillery support to reposition, and many of them paused to acknowledge that none of their renewed coordination would have been possible without the rookies' improbable disruption of the initial assault. Several commanders sent couriers uphill with requests for detailed after-action observations, hoping to understand the timing and execution of the maneuver that had prevented the enemy from carving through their weakened defensive corridor. The fact that the breakthrough originated from instinct, rather than formal training, only intensified their interest, because it suggested that conventional doctrine failed to address real battlefield complexities that frontline soldiers encountered daily. As the day progressed, more anti-aircraft crews experimented cautiously with the exaggerated lead method, attempting to replicate the rookie's timing while adjusting for variations in terrain and weapon condition that affected each gun differently. Although not every test achieved immediate success, the pattern became unmistakable. Under certain environmental conditions, embracing the mechanical lag produced a more accurate intercept than rigid adherence to manual-based firing solutions. Word of these early results spread across the regiment with surprising speed, carried by field radios and shouted conversations between foxholes, gradually transforming a single desperate improvisation into a quietly shared tactical insight that many crews believed could change how they fought future air attacks. Senior artillery officers eventually arrived to review the unconventional method firsthand, observing repeated demonstrations by different crews, attempting to refine the technique into something consistent enough for official consideration. Though initially skeptical, these officers began recognizing that the approach aligned with emerging theories about adaptive fire control, which emphasized flexible responses to unpredictable enemy maneuvers rather than strict reliance on pre-war doctrine. They documented the observations in a formal memorandum intended for divisional headquarters, noting that the technique required careful judgment, yet offered undeniable value in chaotic engagements, where mechanical limitations intersected with environmental distortions. By nightfall, the rookie's discovery had already been incorporated into an unofficial set of field notes passed between gun crews along the ridge, capturing the essence of a method that grew from desperation, yet proved more reliable than traditional procedures under the conditions that defined the Ardennes front. What began as a mocked, seemingly reckless deviation had evolved into a respected battlefield practice, demonstrating that even the smallest act of intuition born from fear, necessity, and raw observation could reshape the tactical landscape when war stripped away the illusion of certainty. As dusk settled across the battered ridge and the wind carried the faint echoes of distant artillery, the soldiers who had survived the day gathered in small, exhausted clusters, exchanging quiet glances that conveyed far more than any hurried conversation could express. The rookie remained beside the worn anti-aircraft gun, staring at the darkened valley where hundreds of men now lived, because he had dared to trust an instinct that no regulation approved and no instructor had ever considered worth teaching. Although the crew celebrated his achievement with relieved laughter and clapped shoulders, he felt a lingering weight in his chest, not from fear or disbelief, but from the sobering realization that survival had hinged on a choice made in a moment when doubt threatened to overwhelm him completely. The platoon commander approached slowly, carrying the same tired expression worn by every officer forced to reconcile training doctrine with the chaotic truths uncovered during real combat, and he stopped beside the gunner with a quiet nod that conveyed respect deeper than any formal commendation. He admitted that no manual could anticipate the peculiar combination of weather, terrain, and mechanical flaws that had shaped the battle, and he acknowledged that the rookie's courage lay not in firing the gun, but in trusting his perception when the world demanded obedience instead. The rookie listened intently,